Guys, welcome back to my channel. If it's your first time seeing this lovely face, my name is Bethel Osiki and I have this series on my channel called Sew with KIZAJ, and this is lesson 7. So Sew with KIZAJ is a beginner's course that takes you sewing right from the basics all the way to the advanced level. Right now we're on lesson 7, and lesson 7 joins 2 lessons to show you how to create something. So I showed you guys how to create a straight simple skirt, and I showed you guys how to create different types of flare. Now we're going to join those two to make a trumpet skirt or a mermaid skirt. In this particular video, I'm going to show you how I sewed this mermaid skirt. Normally I'll do like a mini show for you guys, but this is not my skirt, it's for a client. So I had to post this video, so I didn't have the chance to show it on a person, but I can tell it looks good. And when she does wear it, if she send me a picture, I'm going to post my community feed. But to make this skirt, it's super easy. You're just joining the basic skirt, and you're joining the flare on the bottom. If you haven't seen any of these videos, I'm going to advise you go see them, so that way you understand more how I'm cutting this, even though this video is going to be more detailed. So let's get into the cutting process.
I am so obsessed. I want to chop your.
First, we're going to draft the pattern. The measurements we're going to be needing is going to be the waist, the hip, the waist to where the flare is going to start, and the length, full length of the skirt. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the half length of the skirt, which is going to be 20 inches. That's from the waist to where the flare is going to start. And then I'm going to rule a straight line right at that 20 inches mark. Next, I'm going to measure the hip line, which I usually measure at 8 inches. I'm going to make a mark there and also rule a straight line. I'll measure a waistline, but that's pointless because the waist is technically at the top of that fabric. So at the top of that fabric, which is our waistline, I'm going to go ahead and measure her waist. Her waist is 40 divided by 4, so that's going to give us 10. After marking my 10 inches, I'm adding 1 inch for the dart allowance, and I'm also going to add 1.5 inch for the allowance to sew in. So next, I'm going to measure my hip on the hip line. The hip is going to be 49 divided by 4, which gives us something around 12. To that 12, I'm going to add 1.5. I'm not adding anything for that because the dart does not get to the hip. With the 1.5 allowance, feel free to maybe make it half or make it 1, anything that works perfect for you. Next, I'm going to go ahead and connect my hip to my waist. So I'm going to be connecting at those end points. Just draw an arc, or you could use a French curve to draw an arc, or you could use hip curves. Personally, I just like to freehand it. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hip measurement, like the overall hip measurement including the allowance, and then I'm going to subtract 2 inches from it, and then whatever I get from that is what's going to be the base part of my skirt, or the steps part of my skirt. If you want, you can actually measure this on the clients, but I didn't, and that's why I'm using this formula. Now when I have that point, I'm going to go ahead and connect my hip to that base point. We don't want a point at the hip, so just go ahead and smooth it to make it like a round arc-ish type of curve there. Now this next part you don't have to do when you're actually cutting your pattern, but I wanted to give you guys a visual of what the dart look like. So for the dart, I'm going to measure 4 inches from that midpoint, and then for the length I'm going to measure 6 inches downwards. And then when I'm done measuring 6 inches, I'm going to go to the top and then measure half on both sides of that 4-inch point, and then connect it to the 6-inch on the bottom. So that's it for the front pattern. I'm just going to go ahead and cut this out. Now to cut the back pattern, it's super easy. I'm just going to be using my front as reference. It's going to pretty much be the same thing, except that I'm going to add 1.5 inch allowance for zipper to the center back, and then I'm also going to add some allowance for that. So what you see me doing right here is just pinning down my thing to that way it doesn't move anywhere at that 1.5 inch mark. To the waist of the back, I'm going to be adding 1/2 inch allowance because I want my back dart to be slightly bigger than the front dart. So the back dart is going to measure 1.4 and not 1 inch. Then I just connect my back waist to the hip. Everything else stays the same, so I'll just go ahead and cut out my back piece. So this is our pattern, but I want to go ahead and add a little extra design. If you're a beginner, you do not have to do this. You can just do your pattern as is. But if you want to have fun with it and add a design as well, go ahead and do it. So I'm just adding a little design. I want it to have this illusion that she's skinnier and more hippie. So it's going to be the fabric in the middle and then a different fabric on the side. So you can freestyle this. All I did, I think, was remove 4 inches from the sides to achieve my design. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cut on that line, but note that I'm going to be adding 0.5 inch allowance to that place when I cut it out on the fabric. Anytime you add extra design, always add allowance for stitching. When folding for the front piece, remember that it's supposed to be folded on the center front, so that way that means it folded in two and there's no opening there basically. So that way when we open it up, it's one piece. So I use my pattern to cut out all my fabric and my lining pieces. So that's the back pattern I just put away, and these are the front pattern. So you can see what I meant by I added extra half-inch allowance when cutting it out on the pattern, on the fabric, because of that design. So I don't like stress. I'm not going to be transferring this design onto my lining. My lining I'm going to cut as though there was no design. So I'm just going to put my two patterns together on the lining and just cut it out like the normal front piece without a design. Now, if you are not using this design I'm doing, your front piece, your front fashion fabric is going to look just like this lining is going to look. Long story short, one piece. So now onto the stitching. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and join those side panels, so that way my fashion fabric becomes just one front piece instead of three front pieces. If you notice my stitching, you're going to see that I'm only stitching at a 0.5 inch allowance because that is what I left. Always stitch at the allowance that you leave. After joining the design panels, it's going to basically become the same thing I had on the pattern initially. Go ahead and do my dart on the front piece and the back piece. So the dart on the lining and the fashion fabric is going to be the same. So what I'm doing, just taking my 6 inch, which was what I had planned to use for the dart, and then on the top waist part, I'm going to take half an inch, because if you remember we left half inch for the waist of the front, and then I'm going to just rule that down. So I wanted to show you guys so you guys can visually see what I'll be sewing. So all I'm doing for my dart is sewing on that line. At a particular point, you're not going to need to draw it. I'm only drawing it for you guys to see, but you can actually just put your fabric at that 0.5 inch mark and just sew down straight. I'm showing you guys how I'm doing the dart on the lining because I can mark on the lining and not be worried about it, but I don't want to mark on my fabric. Yeah, I don't know what I was trying to show you guys. I can't even say stitches now that I'm editing. I made my dart on my fashion fabric and on my lining. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place my fashion fabric like so. So I'm going to place my lining on the front facing the front of the fashion fabric. Then I'm going to stitch on the sides. Just so y'all don't forget, I actually made the dart also on the back pieces. So the back lining and the back fashion fabric, I made the dart, but the dart wasn't 0.5, it was 0.75 because that was the allowance I left for that for the back piece. So I'm doing the same thing, placing front on front and just stitching the sides around. When I'm done stitching my fabric to my lining, I'm just going to go ahead and turn that inside out, and then instead of going to the ironing board, I'm just going to use my finger to like sort of finger press it. So finger pressing does a whole lot of good to you when you don't go to the ironing board. Please note that I'm going to be doing the same thing on the two back pieces. So I'm just turning it in and finger pressing the sides. Next, I'll be joining my back piece. So what you see me do is place my two back pieces front facing the front, and then from the top of the waist, I'm going to measure 8 inches downwards. That's where my stitch is going to start. So I'm going to measure 1.5. Remember the zip allowance was 1.5. So from that 8 inches down all the way to the end, I'm just going to stitch a straight line. Make sure the line is very thick because whenever you sew, sometimes the skirt always rips here, like if person is walking. So make sure your stitch is very firm on this area. By the way, the 8 inches on top is for the zipper. Next, I'll fix the zipper. I have a whole video on 3 different methods to fix the zipper, so click on the bubble above to watch it and see how to fix a zipper. You can pick any of those methods for your skirt. It doesn't have to be the same as mine. Okay, so moving along. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my front piece and then I'm going to place it on my back piece, front facing front, like so. And then the next thing I'm going to do is, remember we left 1.5 inch allowance for the sides, right? Don't trust yourself. Go ahead and measure again. So I'm going to go ahead and divide my waist by 2. That was giving us 20 at the end. Measure my waist on the top part and then I'm going to see if it's still 1.5 inch, and then if it is, I'm going to measure my hip to make sure it's still at 1.5 inch, and then I'm going to sew 1.5 inch from the top to the bottom, because now I know my allowance is still the same. If it changes, feel free to mark it and sew to what the new allowance is. When you're done joining, go ahead and measure again. There's never too much of measuring. You want to make sure you're catching any mistakes now. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold my fabric like so. Then I'm going to trim the front just by 1/2 inch, because I want the front waistline to come down a little bit. So all I'm doing is marking 1/2 inch and then just trimming a little bit, so that way it sits well on the waist. So now I'm going to measure the bottom part of the skirt, so that way I can determine what the circumference of the flare is going to be. Now you guys, if you want a more detailed explanation on how I cut the flare, go ahead and watch my how to cut different types of flare video, and then you can use any of the flares you want there. It doesn't have to be exactly like mine. Be creative with this and just cut any type of flare you want. If you want to make it 3 steps, you want to make it 5 steps, just be very creative with it. Here's a time lapse of me cutting my flare though. Enjoy the music. And oh, by the way, in the comment section, guess what kind of flare I was cutting.
Little by little, piece by piece, I take back what's been stolen from me. Little by little, piece by piece, until I'm complete.
Sorry, the previous clips were out of focus. So these are my 2 flares. I want it to be 2 layered. So the fashion fabric one is going to be shorter than the blue one, and I cut it wider too. Next thing I'm doing is pinning my skirt parts to the flare. So what I'm basically doing is I'm going to sandwich my skirt into the 2 flares. So first I'm pinning the bigger part of the flare all around the skirt, as you can see. Then I'm going to come back around and do the other one on the opposite side. For a more close-up of what I did, this is the short lining, this is the skirt, and this is the other flare. So the skirt is sandwiched in between. So next I'm just removing my pins and stitching it all around. Remember, it's 3 pieces, so you gotta be careful, make sure nothing moves. This is what the skirt is looking like so far. I don't know about you guys, but I'm in love with this. It's gorgeous. Next to the waistband. So for my waistband, I just measured my waist, which was 40, and then I added 4 inches to 40. Then I cut that by 3 inches. So I cut out 44 by 3 inches, but I folded it here. So that's going to be 22 by 3 inches. But when you open it up, it's 44 by 3 inches. I feel like in all my skirt videos, I show you guys in detail how to sew waistbands. But if you want me to make a dedicated video to sewing waistband, just let me know. So what I'm doing is basically putting the front of the waistband on the back of the skirt, and I'm going to align the top. Notice that I leave 1/2 inch allowance before I start sewing. So that's going to be like the allowance I'm going to use to stitch the waistband. So while I'm sewing on the top, I'm going to leave 0.5 and sew round. So when I get to the end, notice that I still have that extra allowance I added to the 40 inches. I thought it was 4, but I added like 2. So anything works, 4, 2, 3, just depends on how long you want that external thing to be. So next, I just folded that like so, and then I'm sewing it at 1/2 inch. So that leaves me with like about 1.5 inch to have extra for that blue part. So I'm making a notch on that top corner, so that way it's going to be easier when I turn it, as you can see. So now I move to the other end of the waistband, and I'm going to do the same thing. Just fold it as you can see me fold, and then just sew that 1/2 inch. So for this side, the 1/2 inch is going to align with the zipper. There's not going to be excess, but for the other side there was excess. I'm just going to stitch this at 0.5, and then I'm also going to notch the top corner so that way I can turn it better. So now I'm just going to fold that outer edge, going to fold it in so that way I'm hiding the raw edge. Folding it in usually is like 0.5 inch, usually the same we use to stitch it round. I'm going to fold it in, and then I'm going to sew very close to the edge of where the waistband meets the skirt. I'm going to sew that round. But when I get to the waist part, I want to show you guys how to add side elastic. So I'm going to sew straight till I get to that waist part. So next, I grab my elastic. I did not really cut my elastic to any specific measurement. I just folded it and cut. I think it was about 3 inches wide or 4 inches. I wasn't really using any specific thing. But if you want, you can go ahead and measure 4 or 3 inches, depending on how wide you want it to be. Next, I just feed my elastic in there, and then just watch what I do. I just turn, and then I'm going to stitch a line to hold that elastic in there. I'm going to stitch multiple times so that way it's firm. And then I'm going to come back down and continue sewing my waistband. But as I'm sewing my waistband, I'm dragging my elastic. I am also not sewing on my elastic. It's just in that space as existing. So when I get past that side joining of the skirt, I'm going to come down a little bit more. And then I'm going to pull my elastic, and then I'm going to sew up to stitch it just like I did at the beginning. And then I'm going to sew my skirt as normal, my skirt band as normal. When I get to the other side of the skirt, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Okay, so that's it. So for this bottom part of the skirt, if you have like a weaving machine, you can go ahead and weave it. If you want to fold twice and sew round, you can go ahead and do that. I'm going to leave the finishing of this skirt up to you. Now for the back side, remember when I was doing the waistband, I left one to be longer. So now I'm going to fix my button on there. If you want to see a video on how to do that, click on the bubble above. Thank you so much for watching the video up to this point. I hope it was very detailed and straight to the point. If there's anything you did not understand that I was explaining, go ahead and ask me on Telegram or in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comment section down below so I can make more videos like this. If you haven't subscribed, you know, just go ahead and do so. If you've been following this lesson, make sure to turn on the post notifications so that way you don't miss anything in this lesson, because right now, as you guys can tell, we're already like mixing different things, and it goes up from here. The thing about fashion is you're always mixing stuff. Once you know the basics, which I feel like at this point you guys already know, once you know the basics, it's all about your creativity to just mix these things together and make marvelous things. But I'm having so much for making these tutorial videos. If there's any specific request you want outside of the tutorial videos, let me know so that way I can make those videos for you guys. I cannot wait to see your recreations. If you do recreate this style, send it to me on Telegram or on Instagram. Just send it to me somehow. I love seeing yours recreation. So send it to me so that way I can see it and probably share it on the community feed for other people to see what you guys have worked on. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like to give it a thumbs up, don't forget to subscribe, and I'm gonna see you on my next one. Bye.